Alright, so today we've got the mighty Barra. This one's, are they a 270 in the BF?
Yeah, 270.
270 kilowatt out of a BF R-Spec F6. And it's getting the treatment. Got some valve springs, boundary oil pump gears, atomic timing kit, ARP studs, maybe a fuel pump, obviously some seals, all the good stuff. So we're going to go through the process today of showing you how we like to do oil pump gears, set the timing, install the valve springs. A lot of people are a bit weary on the situation, so we're going to go through and show you how we do it. Pretty much the same as what I did to the Barra Patrol, same as what I did to the Barras I put into the other vehicles I've done. And this guy here has obviously done quite a few of them, so we'll get into it and we'll show you the process on how we like to get it done. Well, so you want to start by taking all your crap off, get everything out of the way, rock cover off, timing cover off. Old matey here's shredded a belt at some point and it's jammed in there, and
see coming out.
It's pulled. Well, that's his crank seal.
That's what's left of it anyway.
So it's jammed up in there, and it's gone inside the motor, and yeah, it's gone everywhere. So
I suppose we'll find out how far it's gone when we pull it apart. There's a bit up the top here on this top guide too. So
I've never seen that before. It's pretty cool.
Never.
Well, it's not cool, but you know, it's different. It's something you don't see. Anyway, get all that off. Get the sump off. I'll take all that crap out to be cleaned, and then we'll get all the timing gear off, start doing the valve springs, do the head studs, do the timing, do the oil pump.
Alright. This is evidently why this motor has no oil pressure. That is the belt and the front main seal. That is clogged. You can see all the fibre shit from the belt. I dare say we're going to find that in the oil pump. And here's another common thing for those playing at home. That's a bit of the top guide, usually from up in here. That just sits right in like that. They always break, usually around 200 odd thousand they're broken, is what I find. But yeah, look how nice and gunky that shit is. So one unusual thing that you would probably do when you're doing this is before you pull your chain off, either way it's got links marked on it, so you can either retime it with that, but if you're not pulling the timing cover off, you would usually mark your chain to your dots here and use an ocky strap. When you're doing valve springs in the car, valve springs and head studs, you'd use like a bungee cord up to the bonnet to hold the chain up, so that way it doesn't drop. And what you would also do is you would mark your cams and your caps. Now these can't be swapped from head to head, they can't go on from side to side or backwards. They are marked, they have indents in them. That is the orientation they must go back in. You cannot swap them. You will chew out the bearings on the head, and well, yeah, it'll be pretty well fucked. So just keep that in mind, and remember that when you're reassembling it, make sure if you're turning the motor over, when doing valve springs, you rotate it back, so that way those two links that you marked are up the top. Don't work off the marked links if you're not pulling the timing cover off, as they will never line up again. You will never, ever, ever get it. People say it's 37 rotations or whatever. I've rotated them over at least 100 times and it never lines up. So keep that in mind when you do it. The other thing to look for is any pitting on the cam lobes. It's more prone in FG and late B series, but it does happen in early ones, so just keep that in mind. And as you can see, that timing guide is pretty broken.
The tensioner was broken.
And when we pulled the tensioner off, he fell apart. Completely fell apart. The piston for the tensioner had rotated in the housing. So I dare say either the teeth on here are stripped or... yeah, there we go. We've got broken teeth on the tensioner. So it is what it is. These things happen. Out in the daylight you can see a little bit better. Oh, around in that pickup tube there's belt and seal, and no doubt some timing guide as well. You got to get all that shit out. Got to get it out, otherwise you'll be back with no oil pressure. Be wondering why. There's all sorts of shit that collects down in here. I've seen broken bits of oil pump down in here as well before. So always make sure you completely clean this out. See, there's a massive chunk of fucking rubber in there too. Come on, look at that. That's just in the couple of minutes I've been doing it. So make sure you always clean that shit out. Anytime you have a sump off, it takes 2 minutes to do. It's not that hard. And don't lose this O-ring. Make sure you put it on. It goes on with no goo. You do not use goo on it. You just put the O-ring back in onto there, and that bolts back onto the pump. You can still buy them new. It is advised to replace them. So now we're up to doing the valve springs. Contrary to belief, you don't need to use compressed air to do them. The way I've always done them is I use top dead center method. So basically you put piston 1 at top dead center, and then you can do 1 and 6 without dropping the valves. Then you move piston 2 to top dead center, and you do 2 and 5, and then piston 3 to top dead center, and you do 3 and 4. Now in the car it's a very annoying job. You usually just do it through this bridge here. You can get around it into the back of the back two there. You got to have this spring off to do it. We might show you that process as if you were going to do it in a car, and see what we see, hey? So you do need the valve spring tool to do it. It's not overly complicated. You don't always have to pull the lifters out either. They can usually just, chill in there, as long as they're not in your way of doing what you need to do and they're not going to interfere. You can usually just leave them chill in there like them ones. These still in the end are a bit of a pain because they're right at the front and those caps are bigger. So this is I believe it's the Mace Barra valve spring tool, and as you can see, it literally just sits straight on there. Now they're the bolts that I use to hold it down, and you've got your 4 spring compressors, so 4 of them, and then your 4 bolts. So that's what pushes down on that. I'll show you now. So if we look here, that sits there. It's only got 1 access hole, but it's all you need. So that sits there, and that bolt screws down in there like this. Then obviously once this is tight, this will push down on the valve spring. Yeah, the valve spring will only go down so far. You won't bend the valve doing it this way unless you bottom the tip of the valve out on the top of the cap. If you do that and you send it too hard, then you're going to bend valves, and yeah, you're not going to have a very good time in general doing it that way. So usually if you're gentle enough, you can I just use a little rattle gun. It's not overly powerful for this. You don't need this stuff awfully tight either. Literally just need to nip it up. So if we have a look here, this will push down. Be careful because these collets like to pop and fly on you. So see, that just pops up, bringing back up a bit, dropping back down, and then we grab a little magnet tool. Magnet tool, you just pull the collets out, and back the valve spring out. There's your retainer, just pops out. There's your valve spring. it's a higher K motor, it is a good time to do the valve stem seals while you're in there. It's an extra couple of minutes per cylinder. And we grab a new valve spring, pull the valve all the way back up. Sometimes I like to drop down like that. Sit that there, sit that back on there. Make sure your cutout hole is pointing at you. These only go on one way, one side's bigger than the other. Can't fit my finger in there, goes in there. Make sure you put them on the right way. I'll sit this in there, cut out towards you where you can get full access to it. And then just make sure that the valve is going to come through that hole. You're not going to push the valve down into the piston and bend it. About there. Usually you just grab a small flathead. And you just pull the valve back up enough for you to be able to get the collets back on. Grease also helps when you do this. Helps stick the collets back to the valve and they won't drop. But we'll see how we go. There's one. And there's two once it goes on. So now you just make sure you watch in there, and I can already see one's dropped off. So that's why you use grease, kids. A little bit of grease or Vaso, as long as it's somewhat sticky. Sometimes there's usually enough oil on the valve to let it stick there. Other times not so much. There we go, and then nice and gently up. There we go, there's our valve spring done.
Same deal with your collets, they only go on one way.
That too.
Pretty common sense, but some people.
So we'll keep pointing along and we'll show you how to do the back ones as if you were doing it in the car. So if you're wondering how to find top dead center when you've got no balancer or tying marks, all I use is the dipstick down the plug hole. Straight down, straight on top of the piston. So if I do that, you can see that's where it is. If I put it down there we go. So that's cylinder 2. It's not at top dead center yet. Cylinder 1 is still at top dead center. You can see the height difference there. So all you do is you stick that down cylinder 2, put your crank bolt in, get your ratchet. You just want to turn him over until the dipstick stops going up. And the piston will dwell at top dead center for a bit, but basically once that dipstick stops moving, which is there, cylinder 2 and cylinder 5 are at top dead center, we can continue with our valve springs. So with the back ones in the car, you can't actually get around here easily. You can use a mirror and one of these fucking magnets and bend it to your position, but it's not always reliable and it's an absolute prick. So what I do, well, I was shown to do it, was you take out your front valve spring, completely taking out like this, get him out of the way, and then you go to your back one and you face your cutout to in here, right next to my finger there. So that's basically where the cutout's pointing. You'll see it as the valve spring comes down. Okay, you just heard the collets pop off the retainer, and then, I don't know how well you can see down in there, probably as good as I can. Let's do this. So, in there, it's where we've got to get our collets out from. And you put them back in through the bridge as well, through under the little bridge here. So, if it wants to cooperate, there we go, virtually just falling out there. There's one. There's two. And then there we go, valve spring comes out. New one sits on there. Sit this on there. And again, just make sure the valve stem goes through that hole. You must go through that hole. You just grab the screwdriver and pull that up a little bit. So sometimes you will need to do this, but just straight in there, turn the screwdriver, and you've got all three slots up. So that way you can put your collet back on.
Obviously this can all be done in the car, even the oil pump gears and all that can be done in the car, but seeing as we're doing the whole lot.
Valve springs, head studs, and pump.
And the fact that I've got...
quicker just to throw it straight on a stand and do it.
I've got quite an equipped workshop here. We can pull it out. Only takes you, half an hour to get the motor out. And then, yeah, a lot easier than mucking around sitting in a K-frame with a sump at your feet. But this is obviously how you do it if you were to do it in the car.
So, also for those who'll do this themselves, you got oil return galleries. Make sure you put rags down in there. You put something over the throttle body hole to make sure it's covered. And again in the spark plug holes, if you're doing it in the car, and obviously the sump's staying on. The last thing you want is drop a collet down there. You can't get the magnet down far enough to pick it back up. So, make sure you stuff rags down in there. We've got the sump off, so if it falls, it's going to hit the ground. We'll find it, and happy days.
Alright, so we'll get the rest of these done and then we'll show you head studs and oil pump.
Valve springs are all done. Nice new shiny springs in there. All the cam bearing surfaces have all got a little bit of lube on them, cam followers. So now we're up to the head studs. We're using the ARP 2000 stud. It's got a 5mm Allen key slot in the top of it. And they come with the usual assembly lube, your washers, and your nuts. So the factory head bolts on Barras are a E18 Torx head bolt, external Torx head, and there's two ways to do it. The first method is, breaker bar or big fucking ratchet. Second method is ye old ugga boy. Decent one usually undoes them. There's no need to take the head off to do this job. You don't need to replace the head gasket. You're literally just doing one at a time. You pull one bolt out, put your stud in, torque it up, move on to the next one. That's, unless you've got to pull the head off to have it, whatever, serviced or whatever. You don't need to usually pull them off. So yeah, we'll show you that process now. We're just setting up a couple of other things at the same time, ready to go. So basically the ARP studs go to 100 foot-pound. Now you don't need to use a lot of this. You use too much of it, it becomes an abrasive, it bites into things and it destroys things, so you don't need to use a lot of it. No need to lube the thread or use thread sealant on it. None of these have an open gallery in any of the heads, in any of the head bolt holes. So you run them down hand tight, finger tight. They don't need to be torqued into the block. And then you lube lube the threads, lube the washers, lube the bottom side of the nut, put your stud in, torque it up, move on to your next one.
And we're doing these one by one. As I said, no need to take the head gasket off or take the head off. One by one, rip them out, next one in. Obviously we're not going to do it in a stage because the whole thing's already torqued down, so rattle them out, get them in there finger tight. We've already pre-lubed them and set them all up the way they're going to go in pretty much.
The lube on both sides of the thread, under and over the washer, bottom side of the nut. And then 100 foot-pound torque wrench. Let's do it. That's it. So this little gun's got a little hand tighten function on it. So basically, once you get to a couple of newton meters of torque, it'll shut off. So, and then we'll just run the nut down like this, just till it stops. There we go. Wasn't a lot of torque. Torque wrench, going on 100 foot-pound. There we go. There's that one. She's in.
That's pretty much it.
So, same as when you're putting a head on, you start from the center and work your way out in a circular pattern. Torques the head down evenly then.
Obviously the dry bolts are going to go in a bit easier than the oiled ones.
And there will still be oil in the holes, because I lube it from factory.
That's what the resistance is.
That's what that resistance is as you wind it in. So there we go. Finger's still hard on the trigger and it's stopped. So there we go. That's down. There we go. As you can see, I still got to do this a bit to get it up the torque. There we go.
Obviously we all know how to use a tension wrench, otherwise we wouldn't be attempting this job. But we'll go ahead and get the rest of these in, and then we'll come back and show you the oil pump gears and pump housing.
These screws are usually a bit of a bitch to undo most of the time. Sometimes you round out the heads. When you round them out, you can usually just drill the head off, and then you just back it out with a fucking put a drill on reverse and back it out or whatever. Yeah, most of the time they're usually a little bit of a prick to get going. So we're about to find out how bad they actually are. There we go. So try and always use one with a metal striker head on it. It sends a shock through the actual screwdriver rather than you just splitting the fucking head of your screwdriver. So there we go.
Could go 7 for 7 here.
Well, yeah, we're just gonna get the drill that head off, and happy days. Should be much better, but the rest of them all undid. So look, if you only strip one, it's a good day.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, probably ain't that much pressure.
Jeez.
Bit more. Yep, there we go. So that just come off, and then you just gently wriggle that backwards and forwards, and there's your backing plate and your gears. all the fun stuff.
Fucking dog. So we've got our oil pump here. We've just dry assembled it at the moment.
Yeah.
When you get your boundary pump gears, they give you
clearance. So that's from,
what they're meant to be.
That's basically from the face of the gear back to either the backing plate or to the front side of the housing. I usually just measure off the backing plate. It's easier to literally get a feeler gauge in there. So these are your specs. So 0024 of an inch on the inner gear, which is this one here. That's your inner, that's your outer. So 0024 on the inner, 0025 on the outer. So yeah, it is a little tight, but that's that. So now what I'll do is I'll pull the backing plate back off and I'll check the outer gear clearance. And then we'll measure tip to tip and outer gear to body. Once you've measured all you've done all your measuring, basically just want to use some sort of assembly lube, you know, or thick oil, or you know, Vaso, whatever, something that's just heavy and sticky. You just want to coat all the surfaces that are getting metal on metal wear, or metal on metal contact I should say. Make sure your shit's clean. So what we'll do is we'll just grab the rag and wipe it down. Make it all nice and clean. Then we'll sit our gears in there. Put some lube in and around them as well. They should sit in there nicely. We just want to put a bit of this just basically in all the grooves. Just don't need to go crazy with it, it's sticky enough. There we go. And then backing plate on. Make sure you try and keep some of this shit off the this face here, any of this machine face. That's all where the backing plate seals to. There's no goo used, no seal, nothing like that. It's just a machine on machine surface. So that sits in there, and a little bit of thread locker. Don't need a lot. Just tying a bit on the threads and on the backing plate. Screw them all in. Don't tighten the first one down straight away, get a few in, or get them all in, and then tighten them down, otherwise your holes won't be lined up and you'll be wondering why.
Alright, so that's pretty much that. We'll get that sealed up, and then we'll jump over here. I've got this all clean, ready to go. We can sit the cams back in, sit the cam, everything back on it, and bolt the oil pump back on, get the atomic kit ready, and we can set up the timing and show you guys how to do that. We've got our oil pump on, we've got our pickup tube on, change the stud because we're putting atomic timing kit on this one, so you got to change that stud.
It's a chromoly stud with no nut.
So we've done that. We've got that out of the way just so that we can get the chain on. Got the cams in, tightening them down. This is so that you can roll the cams as you do it. Obviously they want to bounce and roll around to where they want to sit, not where we want them to sit. So as you tighten them down, you want to hold them where you want them, and crank them down. Once they're tight, we will grab the
chain and crank sprocket.
This is the atomic chain. It's a pretty heavy duty looking thing. Doesn't have coloured links, or doesn't have painted links, it's got coloured links. So there's them ones, this one here.
So basically
billet sprocket.
That mark lines up with your timing mark in the cog. And then those two line up with the ones up the top. There should be 8 links between dot to dot.
So you got 1, then you got 6 in between, and
then
1.
Second coloured link. Now these are a tight fit. We might need a rubber mallet or something for that. Just heard it bottom out. So make sure chain goes around there. So let's have a look at bottom link. Bottom link is where it needs to be. So if you have a look here, you can just see the coloured
Probably
link
poor
there.
lighting, but the coloured link should line up with that there. That's why to give that window, I guess.
Pretty well. So now we'll just rotate the cam. We do intake cam first, rotate it around until the coloured link lines up with our dot, and then we just want to put a little bit of tension on the chain. We don't want to go overboard. And then we line a second link up with...
These are your marks, obviously, right?
Well, your timing mark is a dot.
Yeah.
There's a small dot in there. It'll probably be hard to see on camera, but they also line up with this.
It's there.
So you put a little bit of tension on the intake side of the cam. Not so much that it pops it around one, but then you take up the slack here. If we can find the hole. There we go.
Probably should have shown you how to
Reset the tensioner. When you reset your tensioner, you push this link down, push it in, you line it up to where the first tooth is, you push that in, and that locks it in. So now, we'll hand check these 2 bolts. They don't need to be stupid tight, they just need to be tight. And then, because we've got tension on our chain between the cams, we can run these 2 bolts in here. Don't snug them down yet. Run them both down. And you just want to push this guide against the chain. You don't want to move the chain, you just want it to sit against the chain. Then you'll just snug them down. These cam cap bolts go to 10 Newton meters. When you've done it long enough, you know how tight they go. And then we pull the pin. Trusty screwdriver. We're just going to knock it onto the next tooth of the tensioner as far as it wants to go. That's it. Now it's got some tension on it. That's not going to move. We've still got a little bit of slack on there. Oil pressure will take it up and push it out onto the next tooth when it slowly wears in. And that's pretty well how you time your barra.
To check your timing, obviously, it's got no plugs in it, so right now, take that off, obviously.
Yeah.
Time would be to wind it over, but as stated, when you've done enough of them, you know what you're doing, so you don't need to do that. But for everyone doing it their first time, I would recommend turning it over, making sure everything lines back up again. Obviously 2 rotations.
3 links between the bottom timing mark and that timing mark, if you can count. The stock crank gears have a lot more holes in them. You can see through, you can probably count them all.
Alright, so we've gone and cleaned all our timing cover, sumps out there, rocker covers over there ready to be sealed. We're going to get all that back on. Obviously you just put it back on the way that you took it off.
Make sure you clean it. If it's a
all these surfaces have to be cleaned.
It gets gooed.
We've got a bit of oil there, we'll finish cleaning all that off and roll it over.
Recommended stuff to use for your BFFG Falcons, Loctite 5900. That's what Ford specify in their workshop manual.